Sensing their stare, Shirlian gave a smile and turned around. First time seeing a real cursed shackle? Cursed shackle. Like its name, it was a shackle formed by a curse. Heavenly officials who were banished from heaven would have the mark of sin forged by the wrath of heaven branded onto their bodies, forming a fetter that sealed spiritual powers away, never to be freed. Just like a brand on the face or chains shackling the hands and feet, this was a form of punishment and the mark of a warning. It was both terrifying and humiliating. As the laughingstock of the three realms who was banished twice, of course Shirlian had such a cursed shackle on his body. It was impossible for these two junior martial officials to not have heard of this before, but there was still a little discrepancy between having heard of something and seeing it in person. Thus, Shirlian could understand why they would react the way that they did. He figured that this thing might be making the two junior officials wary and uncomfortable. After all, it wasn't like it was a good thing. At first, he was using the excuse of searching for clothes in order to step outside, but he was stopped by Fu Yao's eye roll and his comment, "If you go out there looking like that, you will be called a pervert." In the end, it was thanks to Nanfang, who tossed him a light attendant's robe that he'd grabbed from the back of the temple, that Shirlian was able to stop being so indecent. However, even after they'd settled back down, it felt like the incident earlier had caused the mood to become somewhat awkward. And so, Shirlian took out the scroll given by the palace of Lingwen and said, "Do you guys want to take another look at this?" Nanfang raised his eyes and gave him a look. "I've looked through it already. I think he's the one who needs to take a better look at it." "What do you mean I'm the one who needs to take a better look at it?" Fu Yao countered. "That scroll isn't detailed at all. It's completely worthless. And you think it's worth another look?" Hearing him say that the scroll was worthless, Shirlian couldn't help but feel a little sad for the ashen-faced junior officials at the palace of Lingwen who had put this together. Fu Yao then continued, "Oh yeah, where were we? The temple of Nanyang. Why does Nanyang have so many female believers, right?" "All right." Shirlian put the scroll away and rubbed his pulsating forehead. He knew now. Tonight, no one was going to look through it. If they weren't going to focus on real business, then why not see what the side business was all about? Turns out, other than the Royal Highness, who had spent centuries collecting junk in the mortal realm, every god and Buddha knew that there was a period of time when Nanyang Junjun function was called Juyang Junjun. The man himself deeply despised this title, and everyone only had one word for his experience: injustice. Originally, the correct writing was Juyang for perfect masculinity, but the reason it was wrongly transmitted was because of a certain incident. Many years ago, there was a king constructing temples and palaces. In order to demonstrate his faith and sincerity, he personally drafted the titles of every temple and palace's establishment plaque. But when it came to the palace of Juyang, for some reason, he wrote it with the wrong character. This gave the officials responsible for the construction much grief. They just couldn't figure out whether His Majesty had changed it intentionally, or if this was an accidental mistake. If it was intentional, then why wasn't there a clear decree that indicated, yes, this is what we want to change it to? If it wasn't intentional, then why would such a low-level mistake be committed? It wasn't like they could say, "Your Majesty, you are wrong." Who knows if His Majesty would think that they were being sarcastic about his carelessness, that they were hinting that his knowledge was shallow, his heart insincere. This was His Majesty's royal writing. Were they going to trash it if they weren't going to use it? Divine beings had hearts most difficult to discern, and the officials were in pure agony. After much deliberation, instead of causing grief for His Majesty, they might as well cause grief for Juyang Junjun. It had to be said that they made the right decision, When the emperor discovered that perfect masculinity had become gigantic masculinity, he didn't make any statements about it, but instead invited a bunch of scholars to scour the ancient texts with great vigor to find countless minuscule reasons and compose many essays to strongly prove that it should have been gigantic masculinity in the first place, and that perfect masculinity was wrong. In any case, every palace of perfect masculinity in the country now became a palace of gigantic masculinity overnight. Feng Shen, who got his divine title changed so randomly, didn't find this out until decades later. He basically never bothered to look closely at the signs of his own temples, but one day he suddenly felt rather baffled. How come there were so many women coming to pray in his temples, and each of them were flushed with shyness on their cheeks? And what in the world were they praying for when offering incense? After he figured it out, he charged to the peak of the 9th sky and shouted his curses to the scorching sun and the vast skies. Every heavenly official was shaken by this. After he was done cursing, there was nothing he could do, so he could only relent. It wasn't like he could pick on those women who were praying so sincerely, so he forced himself to listen for many years. It wasn't until a decent ruler came along who thought gigantic masculinity was horribly obscene that it was changed to Nanyang. Nonetheless, no one forgot what else this martial god could grant besides his duty as a martial god. Only everyone also upheld an unspoken rule: never use that name to call him. At the same time, they also upheld a general consensus: how to evaluate this Nanyang Jinjin. One word: good. Nanfang's face was already as dark as the bottom of an aged wok, yet Fu Yao was suddenly feeling poetic, and he recited demurely: friend of women, a trusty companion, ask for a son, most powerful is he. The secret formula to bolster masculinity. A son in your prayers, Nanyang delivers. Shilian very kindly held back his laugh, leaving a little bit of face for Nanyang in front of his divine statue. Nanfang, however, was outraged. Don't you be acting all sarcastic here. If you're really so bored, go and sweep the floor. The moment those words came out, Fu Yao's face also darkened to the color of a pot bottom. If the palace of Nanyang couldn't stand to hear those two words, then the palace of Xuanzhen couldn't stand to hear people bring up the term sweep. This was because when Mu Qing was still an errand boy at the Royal Holy Pavilion, what he did all day was serve tea, deliver water, sweep, and change the sheets for Shilian at the palace of the Crown Prince. One day, Shilian saw him silently reciting training incantations while sweeping. He was thus moved by his spirit for learning and working hard under such harsh and difficult circumstances, and thus persuaded the Goshe to take him in as a disciple. How to best describe this incident? This could be considered grand or minuscule. It could be humiliating or a compliment. It depended entirely on the individual in question. Obviously, the individual in question had taken this as the humiliation of his life, since Mu Qing and every martial warrior under his command would flip out whenever they heard the word sweep. Sure enough, Fu Yao steadied himself. Then, after throwing a look at Shilian, who was waving his hand, appearing fully innocent, he sneered. Listening to you, those who don't know would think that your palace of Nanyang sides with the palace of the Crown Prince and fights hard for his injustices. Nanfang sneered too. Your general certainly is the ungrateful one that bites the hand that feeds him. What more can I say? Shilian was just trying to intercept when Fu Yao ahaed and said, the kettle calling the pot black. What right do you have to make accusations? Listening to them turning him into the mallet to beat each other onto the spine of the heavenly official who stood up right there on the altar, Shilian finally couldn't take it any longer. Wait, hold up, stop, stop. Of course, no one paid him any mind, and they even started throwing fists. Who knows who threw the first punch? Either way, the altar was split in half just like that, and platters of fruits rolled all over the ground. Seeing how there was no way he could stop this fight, Shirlian sat himself in the corner and heaved a sigh. What a sin! He then picked up a small steamed bun that had rolled to his feet, dusted off its skin, and was about to bite down when Nan Fang saw this from the corner of his eyes and immediately slapped it away. Don't eat that! Fu Yao stopped too and appeared shaken and disgusted. How could you eat it when it's rolled into the dirt? Shirlian used this chance to raise his hand. Stop, stop, stop. I have something to say. He separated the two and said, looking amicable, First, that Highness the Crown Prince you two speak of happens to be me. This Highness hasn't even said anything, so don't sling me around like a weapon to attack each other. He paused for a moment, then added, I don't think your generals would ever behave like this. If you two act so, you will ruin their reputations. When those words were spoken, the faces of the other two changed to something indiscernible. Shirlian continued, Second, you two are here to help me, right? So do you listen to me or do I listen to you? It was a moment before the two replied, We listen to you. While their expressions looked like they were saying, Listen to you, dream on, Shirlian was very satisfied. Then, pa! He put his hand together in prayer. Good. Now thirdly, the most important thing. If you must throw something, then please throw me instead of food. Nan Fang finally dug out the steamed bun that Shirlian had clutched in his grip, hoping for a chance to eat it. He said, looking like he couldn't take it anymore, If it's fallen to the ground, then don't eat it. The next day, back at the chance encounter shop, the tea master was once again by the entrance with his leg up, relaxing, and saw the three approaching from far away. The cultivator in light and simple white robes, with a bamboo hat that hung on his back, led the way, while the two tall, black-clad youths trailed behind him. That cultivator had come strolling, his arms crossed. He spoke languidly, sounding more idle than he did. Owner, 3 cups of tea, please. The tea master smiled. Coming. Then he thought to himself, those 3 silly guys are here again. What a shame, looking each more sightly than the other. But their brains are each more damaged than the next. What God, what ghost, and what heavens? When you're mental, what good is being handsome? Shirlian still picked the spot next to the window, and after they'd settled, Nan Fang spoke up. Why do we have to come here to discuss things? Are you sure that there won't be people listening in? Shirlian replied warmly, It's fine. Even if the other people hear us, they won't care. They'll only think that we are insane. In order to avoid the 3 of us continuing to waste each other's time like this, let's lay it all out, Shirlian said. Now that we've calmed down for a night, have you guys thought of any ideas? Fu Yao's eyes flashed, and he said coldly, Kill it. No shit, Nan Fang said. Nan Fang, don't be so rude. Fu Yao didn't say anything wrong, Shirlian said. The way to solve the problem is to kill the creature. But the problem is, where do we go? What are we killing? How do we kill it? I suggest. Right then, the sound of gongs and drums came from the main street, and the 3 looked out the window. It was that procession of delivering family again, looking bleak and tragic. This party of men and horses blew their instruments to the utmost, hollering and cheering as if they were afraid that people couldn't hear what they were about. Nan Fang frowned. Didn't they say that the people around Mount Yujin don't dare to make a big show of these ceremonies anymore? This procession consisted of large, strong, and buff men, their expressions and muscles both taut, and cold sweat oozed from their forehead, like they weren't carrying a festive and cheery bridal sedan, but a guillotine that'd end their lives early. It made one wonder just what kind of person was seated in that sedan. After humming for a moment, just as Shirlian was thinking of going to check things out, a sinister wind blew by, raising one of the curtains on the side walls of the sedan. The figure within the sedan, behind the curtain, was lying in a really odd position within the sedan. Her head was bent at an awkward angle, and beneath the bridal veil revealed bright red lips, the smile of which was overly exaggerated. The sedan tipped, and the covering fell, exposing a pair of bulged eyes staring their way. From the looks of it, this was clearly a woman who had had her neck wrung, and was laughing uproariously at them soundlessly. Perhaps it was because the sedan carriers were shaking too hard, but that bridal sedan wasn't steady in the least, so that woman's head bounced along with the bumps. They bumped, and thud! A head fell off and rolled onto the street, and the headless body sitting inside the sedan also fell forward. Bang! The entire person crashed out of the sedan.